Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to Coin Toss, a video introducing generative art techniques as well as arrays. We're going to learn how to make this nice little piece of art here today, um, where you can randomly populate your screen with a bunch of different circles that are all sort of randomly assigned a different color. And I've put a few other controls in here just to make it a little bit more fun to play with. All right, so let's get started and make a new sketch. And let's just start by taking a look at what the random function does. This is what's going to allow us to start to put some generative components into our pieces. And let's start by modeling a coin toss, right? So random will return a floating point value, and let's print this, right, between 0 and whatever number you put in here. So if I say 0, if I say random 1, it's going to return a number between 0 and 1, right? And if we were to put this in draw, you can see now, right, I'm getting values in between 0 and 1. I don't think we really have any number that's like purely 0, and I'm not seeing any that are actually 1, right? So if I wanted to model this coin toss, right, what I would do is I would actually say I want you to give me values in between 0 and 2, right? And then I want to cast those as an integer. So basically lop off anything that's behind the decimal point, right? So now, before we do that actually, let's take a look at what random 2 gives us. So now we have numbers that are 0 point something and 1 point something, right? We could sit here for a couple of hours and watch it and see if we ever get a true 0 or a true 2, right? But I don't think that's going to happen, right? So we're getting these numbers between 0 and 2. And in order to kind of only have 2 outcomes, right, if we're thinking just about like this coin toss, I can just cast it as an int, and that will lop off, again, the things behind the decimal place. And now I'm basically flipping a coin 60 times a second and getting zeros and ones output. This is kind of a fun way to start thinking about, how to model some chance operations that you could execute in real life in your code, right? Like if I wanted to roll a die that had 6 sides, I could say, give me a number between 0 and 6, and I should get 6 different outcomes. So numbers between 0 and 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different outcomes, right? So now I'm modeling rolling a die, right? And that's kind of a cool thing that we can do with this random function. You can also, give it different arguments. You can change the range. So I could say, actually, my lower limit is 6 and my upper limit is 10, right? Or I could say my lower limit is negative 100 and my upper limit is 0, right? So you can give this random function more than one argument, and that will change the range of the numbers that it outputs. Okay, so now you're familiar with this random function. Let's move on to looking at arrays, which are going to help us kind of store a bunch of different values that we're going to randomly generate with this function. So let's go here to trusty pen and paper and start looking at what arrays are. So arrays are basically just like lists, right? And these lists are indexed, meaning that they have a position on the list that is tied to a number, right? So when I make an array, I need to tell first processing like what kind of data, what kind of variable am I making a list of. So if I wanted to have a list of integers, I would say int, and then I'm going to use square brackets, right? That's how processing knows I'm making an array, right? And then I would give it a name. Maybe I'll call it ints. That's my list of integers, right? And then I can say equals new integer array. And here I would need to put the size of it, right? So if I wanted it to be 10, I would say 10, right? And this is going to make me a list or a blank list with 10 spaces in it, right? And then when I want to go grab something from the list, I just take the name of my array. I would say like ints, and then I want the item that's on the third position in this array, right? So basically what this does is it makes a list, right? So ints and 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., right? All the way until, well, I guess it would be 9 actually. It wouldn't get up to 10 because there's 10 places in the list, but we start from 0, right? And then I can assign integers to the different places in this list. Maybe the first one is 100, and the second one is 10, and the third one is 25, and the fourth one is, 72, right? So when I go and I say print, ints3, it's going to print out this number, 72, right? And I can use these arrays for p-vectors. I can use them for floats. I can use them for ints. I can use them for color variables, right? You can make arrays with a lot of different types of variables. And I would encourage you to go check out the reference for, there's a few other ways that we can initialize these and populate them, but we'll look at a couple specific ways we're going to do that to create the example code. But I will encourage you to go read the reference just to see the full scope of how you can use these different arrays, right? So let's go back to our code. And let's decide first, like, how many repetitions or how many, what's the size of our array, right? So I'm going to say int reps, and let's just start with 10, right? So we're going to have 10 units or 10 spaces in our list. And then I'm going to make a, let's just start with float, right? An array of floats, and I'll say floats, right? I'll name it floats equals new floats array, and I need to tell it how big it's going to be, so I'll say reps, right? Oh, float reps, right? So what have I done? I've said, hey, I'm going to declare an array of floating point numbers. I'm going to name it floats, and then I'm going to tell it how big is that going to be, and it's going to be 10 units long, right? This list has 10 items in it. This array has 10 items. And then if I want, I can come in here and set up, and I can say for int I equals 0, I is less than the number of reps, right? I plus plus. And I can say every time we iterate through this code, I want you to set floats of whatever count we're on, right, equal to a random number between 0 and 10, right? And then what I can do, just so we can see what's inside of it, I can say at the end, what I'll do is I'll say print line floats. And that will print this array. So let's see what that looks like. And I actually don't want that. Okay, so you can see I got this array, right? And it's indexed 0, 1 through 9. And each of these places in my array has one of my random numbers that I've generated between 0 and 10. Okay, so this is pretty cool. Let's look at how we might actually use this to kind of draw something interesting. So I was using some random colors and some random positions, right? So let's, instead of just like a bunch of different floating points, let's do an array of p-vectors, right? P-vector, we'll call it pvs equals new p-vector array, and actually I forgot to put this, right? Array, and we're going to make it how big? Number of reps, right? And then instead of doing this, we're going to say pvs, right? And then we're going to say new p-vector, right? Somewhere between 0 and my x position, let's go between 0 and width. And then my y position will be between 0 and height. And then let's print that out, right? This first p vector, 16 and 4. The second one, 88 and 49. The third one, 11 and 43. The fourth one, 44 and 18. The fifth one, 71 and 7, right? So you can see I've got this list of p vectors that I generated in my for loop here in setup. And now what I can do is in draw, I can go in here and I can say, let's make our background white. And we also probably need to make a size 640, 480, right? And what we're going to do is we're also going to use a for loop, and same setup as before, int I equals 0. I'm actually just going to copy and paste this, add a curly bracket, Command T. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is I will say push matrix and pop matrix. And then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, let's translate to the p vector, to the position stored in each of these p vectors. And again, since we're iterating through this list, right, we can use I. So we're going to say pv's I, right? This is 0 the first time, 0, it's 1 the next time, 2 the next time, right? And then I'm going to grab the x value from this first p vector here, and then we'll say pv's I dot y. Right? So we're translating to this position that we've stored, and then let's draw an ellipse at the origin, and let's make it, let's say diameter by diameter, and I'll come up here and say float d equals, just for now, 100, right? So if we run the sketch, you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 circles, all kind of randomly placed throughout the sketch, right? Because we first created an array to store a bunch of p vectors, and then we populated that array with random values, right? And then we're reading that information here, right, from this array. We're grabbing these values, these p vectors rather, from the array, and then we're using the values stored in those p vectors to move around the canvas and draw these different circles, right? And that's pretty cool. So what we can do to give us a little bit of control is let's go in here and say void key pressed. And if I press the space bar, then I want you to go back through this array and change. I want you to randomly repopulate all of the positions, change all those p vectors. So the same way that we calculated a random width and height for each of these p vectors during setup, now when we press the spacebar, it'll do the same thing. So if I run my sketch again, every time I press spacebar, right, it is going to change those p vectors. Okay, so now let's look at how we can color these in a little bit differently. So let's go up here and say color array, right? So I want to have an array of color values equals, let's name it colors, right? And this equals a new color array with size reps. Good. And then same thing in here, right? We're initializing, or we're populating this array rather with a bunch of different new p vectors. So we can say colors I equals color, and then we'll say random between 0 and 255, right? And we're just going to do that for all 3 color channels. So we're going to have a random red channel, a random blue value, and a green value, and a random blue value. And we're going to store that in the array depending on what iteration we are through this for loop. And now I can come in here and I can say fill color I, right? And this will grab the color variable that I've stored in my array named colors, right? at whatever position we are in this for loop, right? So the first time it'll grab the first color, the second time when I is equal to 1, the next color, right, etc. Just like we did with this p vector array. And so now, if we run the sketch, we should have the ability to move around our randomly colored circles. And you'll notice here that the colors aren't changing. That's because I just didn't copy it into the spacebar here. And that's, that's something that's worth kind of mentioning too. When you are putting sort of generative elements into your artwork, it's really important to kind of consider like what's random and what's not. Like what's the range of randomness that you're putting in here, maybe I don't want it to be just totally random from the rainbow, like every single possible color. Maybe I want it to be a shade of red, or maybe I have like a predetermined, kind of set of colors that I'm choosing from, right? So the way that you use this random function is going to change how your sketch behaves. It's going to change how how it looks and behave. So it's kind of important to think a little bit more thoughtfully about how you want these things to work, because it will kind of change, right? And you can see now the shapes are different colors every single time. I'm not always having the same 10 colors. So let's also get this looking like we did. We'll say no stroke. And now we can also just come up here and I can say I want 100 reps instead of just 10, right? So now I'm going to have 100 p vectors, I'm going to have 100 different colors, and I'm going to, instead of just having 10, right, that I'm drawing, now I've got 100 on screen. And I think what I was doing before also was I was mapping D to my mouse X just for fun. So 0, 640, and I think the smallest diameter I gave was 10, and then the largest one was like height. Yeah. And so now I've got two ways to control the sketch. Spacebar will, randomize again the position and colors of all 100 of our circles, and then as I move my mouse left and right, those circles will grow and shrink. So this can kind of be a fun little playable sketch here. All right, so this is the end of our video. We've accomplished everything we set out to do here. So I'll see you in the next one.